help me. A homeless girl pulled a man from a lake only to discover she had no address, no ID, no school books, no warm bed to crawl into at night. She was just a shadow, barely seen, barely heard. A girl of about 17, sleeping behind dumpsters, warming her hands over sidewalk grates, ignored by the world. But one cold morning by the lake, everything changed. She was scavenging near the water's edge when a splash shattered the silence. A body flailing, sinking. A cry for help, without hesitating, without thinking about the ice slicing through her skin or the fact that she herself could drown, she jumped. No one was watching, no news crew, no cheering crowd. Just her, and a man disappearing beneath the water. She didn't know if she could swim well enough. She didn't know if she'd get out alive, but she knew this: if she didn't try, he would die, and that was enough. With scraped hands and a burning chest, she pulled him to shore, gasping, soaked, shivering. She pressed on his chest like she'd once seen a paramedic do. She begged him to breathe, and when he coughed, when his lungs fought to live again, she whispered one word: "You're okay." But he wasn't the only one who needed saving. We often speak of heroes as those with capes, badges, or medals, but heroism is not about uniform or rank. It's about instinct, compassion, and the courage to act when most would run. That homeless girl, the one people crossed the street to avoid, became a hero not by title, but by heart. Why is it that we so easily overlook those on the margins? Why do we think poverty strips someone of wisdom, or kindness, or strength? She had nothing, but in her hands that day was the power of life, and in her soul the depth of empathy most of us forget to carry. When he came to confused, grateful, broken, he stared at her. "Who are you?" She shrugged. "No one important." But he disagreed, because what she didn't know, what he would later tell the police, the medics, and the press, was that he was there to end his own life. He hadn't fallen, he had jumped. And her voice, the last thing he heard before he sank, "Help me pull you out," was the only reason he fought to stay. Sometimes it is those who have every reason to give up, who give the most, and sometimes the one you rescue ends up rescuing you back. Days later, her story came to light, not because she wanted fame, but because the man she saved was the CEO of a major foundation, a man who had everything, until depression took hold, until grief made him forget his purpose. But she reminded him, and he reminded the world that one act of kindness can change a life, and that a hero can come from the coldest alley with nothing but a beating heart and a willingness to care. She didn't ask for a reward, but what she received changed her life: a home, therapy, an education she never dreamed of, and a new label: no longer homeless girl, but youth ambassador, speaker, mentor. She speaks now in schools and shelters, reminding others that their pain doesn't make them powerless, that survival is strength, that love can rise from the ashes of suffering, and most of all, she teaches us this: never underestimate the one you walk past, because under the dirt, under the scars, beneath the silent eyes, may lie the fiercest kind of beauty, the kind that dives into icy waters to save a stranger, and ends up saving the world, one soul at a time. She was not trained for emergencies. No certification hung around her neck. No one ever taught her how to react in a crisis. But when the moment came, a moment that could mean the difference between life and death, she didn't hesitate. She ran. She jumped. She acted. Why? Because something deep inside her, something raw and untouched by poverty or pain, told her that life was sacred, that you don't wait for someone else to take the lead when a soul is slipping beneath the surface. And so she listened to that voice, that instinct, that heartbeat of humanity. The power of human instinct and compassion is a force we underestimate far too often. We tend to associate heroism with training, education, even profession. We say they knew what to do, as if only the prepared are capable of greatness. But what about those who have nothing? What about a girl who sleeps in alleys, whose meals come from trash bins, who has no access to books or safety or care? Could such a person carry inside them the capacity to save a life? She did. When she heard the splash and saw the man struggling in the lake's frigid water, she didn't stop to calculate her own odds. She didn't think of the cold or the danger or what people would say. She simply moved. Something in her soul leapt forward like a flame catching wind. There was no time to weigh decisions or consider consequences. All that mattered was the life in front of her, the life slipping away. That's the power of unfiltered, untrained, unconditional compassion. Some might call it foolish, others might call it luck. But the truth is, this kind of action doesn't come from ignorance. It comes from instinct, the instinct to preserve life, the instinct to care. And though we often try to intellectualize morality, place it into frameworks, programs, and disciplines, what this story shows is that morality is often most alive in those who live closest to the edge. Those who know pain, those who have felt invisible. Compassion is not the luxury of the well-fed. It is the treasure of the broken-hearted. And in moments of crisis, it isn't our degrees or our resumes that define us. It's whether or not we step forward. This girl, nameless in the news for days after the event, had every reason not to help. She could have walked away. She could have stayed hidden. No one would have blamed her. No one expected anything from her. In fact, most people expected nothing of her at all. That is, until she pulled a grown man out of an icy lake with her bare hands. In that moment, she taught us all something that no classroom could. She taught us that the capacity for love and sacrifice is not bound by housing or status. It isn't restricted to the privileged. In fact, it may be stronger in those who have suffered deeply. When you've lived through pain, you become more attuned to the pain of others. When you've been hungry, you feel more for those starving, and when your life has been ignored, you become fiercely protective of other lives at risk. Her actions revealed something primal, something pure. That the line between survival and selflessness is thinner than we think. She could have chosen to protect herself, but she didn't, because in that moment, a life needed her, and when no one else saw, she saw. She saw a human being, not just a body in the water. She saw someone worth saving, and even more important, she believed she could do it. No one ever told her she was capable, but her heart told her she was. That belief, that flicker of unspoken courage, is what made her leap. That's the part of instinct we often forget. It's not just reaction, it's recognition. She recognized value in a stranger's life. And somehow, despite being cast aside herself, she believed she had the power to protect that value. In saving him, she awakened something in all of us, a reminder that within each of us, no matter how broken, how poor, how overlooked, there lives a pulse of compassion strong enough to cut through fear. A pulse that tells us to jump, to reach, to pull someone back when they're going under. That is the power of human instinct, and in a world so eager to categorize, to sort, to decide who is worthy, this girl proved that heroism doesn't ask permission. It simply acts. She sat on the sidewalk, back against a graffiti-stained wall, holding a paper cup with a few coins clinking at the bottom. People walked past her as if she didn't exist, some with pity in their eyes, most without even a glance. To them, she was just another homeless girl, another problem to avoid, another statistic to shuffle aside. No one asked her name, no one asked her story, and so her story remained untold, until the day she pulled a drowning man from the lake and forced the world to finally see her. We live in a world where appearances are everything, where judgments are made in seconds. Clothes, hygiene, posture, eye contact. All these things are unconsciously measured before we decide whether someone deserves our time. And when it comes to the homeless, society's verdict is swift and brutal. Unworthy, unclean, unsafe, unimportant. We pass them on the streets, avert our eyes, sometimes toss spare change without a word. Rarely do we ask ourselves who they were before they ended up here. Rarely do we ask what brilliance, what kindness, what value might be hidden beneath the dirt. The girl who saved a life wasn't a trained lifeguard. She wasn't a college student or a volunteer with a humanitarian organization. She was homeless, and in that one moment of instinctive courage, she exposed a painful truth, that we've built an entire system of judgment based on nothing but surface. We assume that if someone is on the street, they must have failed, that they're addicted, unstable, irresponsible. We assume they've made poor choices and now must suffer the consequences. But these assumptions are not only dangerous, they're deeply dehumanizing. They reduce people to shadows, they strip away dignity before a word is even spoken, and in doing so, we miss what's most essential, because that girl, barefoot, shivering, invisible, was more present, more courageous, more human than most of the bystanders that day. She had every reason not to help, and yet she was the only one who did. This begs the question, how many heroes have we overlooked simply because of how they look? How many lives have been quietly noble, quietly brave, while we were too busy judging their worth? The homeless are not a monolith. They are veterans, children, single mothers, refugees, LGBTQ+ youth, people fleeing abuse, people abandoned by the systems that were supposed to protect them. Many have faced traumas that would break the strongest among us. And yet they survive, they endure, they hope, they still find ways to care for others. But we don't see that. We see the dirt, we see the tattered clothes, and we make our decision, not worthy. It's an education system failure. A media failure, a moral failure. We are taught from an early age to aim for success, to look the part, to avoid danger, and in doing so, we are taught, without words, to fear the poor, to keep our distance, to assume the worst, and perhaps most tragically, to forget that every person sleeping on the street once had dreams, once had a family, once had a future they believed in. That girl's act of heroism disrupted that narrative. She forced the cameras to turn her way. She forced the media to ask, who is she? And suddenly, people began to care. But why did it take such a dramatic act for her life to be considered valuable? Why did she have to save someone in order to be seen as someone? This is what we must confront. If we only value people when they perform miracles, then we have failed to understand human dignity. Every person matters, not just the ones who make headlines. And every homeless individual carries a story, often a heartbreaking, powerful, and redemptive one. If only we'd stop to listen. The girl by the lake was no longer invisible after that day, but there are thousands just like her, still waiting to be seen. Still waiting for a moment where someone will look past the label and recognize the soul beneath. As a society, we must learn to widen our lens, to question our assumptions, to teach our children that compassion doesn't wear a uniform and worth isn't measured by appearance. Judging the unseen doesn't make us wise, it makes us blind, and until we learn to truly see, without prejudice, without fear, we will continue to miss the extraordinary in the ordinary. We will continue to walk past heroes. She had no home, no safety net, and no one to call when nights grew cold or when fear sat heavy on her chest. Her clothes were torn, her hands were rough, her eyes tired. But inside her was something that the world couldn't measure, something built in silence, shaped by hardship and sealed by the fire of survival, strength, a kind of strength that doesn't shout or demand attention. A strength that simply endures, the kind you don't often see until it's tested. When she dove into the freezing lake to pull out a drowning man, it wasn't muscle or skill that carried her forward. It was something deeper. A will that had been shaped by every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every moment she had to fight just to exist. She didn't have the luxury of fear. She had already faced more terrifying things than water. She had already survived more than most people could imagine, and that's the truth we forget too often. Strength is not always loud or visible. It's not defined by what someone looks like or what accomplishments decorate their past. Sometimes, strength is quiet. It's in the way someone keeps going even when everything around them says stop. It's in the way someone cares even when no one has cared for them. It's in the ability to act with courage, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. This girl had been broken by the world in 1,000 ways. She had felt the sting of rejection more times than she could count. People looked through her, talked around her, sometimes treated her as less than human. But somewhere along the line, she made a choice, not to become bitter, not to give up, not to disappear into the darkness that tried to swallow her. Instead, she chose to hold on to something good inside her. A light, a sense of right and wrong, and when the moment came, she let that light lead her. That is the hidden strength we so often overlook. We think brokenness disqualifies people from being strong. But sometimes the very act of surviving makes someone stronger than we can ever know. Pain can harden a person, yes, but it can also sharpen their instincts, deepen their empathy, and stretch their courage. She knew what drowning felt like, not in water, but in life. She knew what it was to gasp for air when the world seemed to crush her, to scream for help and hear nothing in return. So when she saw someone else struggling, someone else slipping away, she responded. Because in that moment, she wasn't just saving him, she was honoring her own pain. She was saying, I know what it's like, I'm here for you. So many people walk through life with silent wounds, with trauma etched into their bones. They don't always show it, they don't always speak it, but when the time comes, they act. And their strength doesn't come from perfection. It comes from the decision to care despite the pain. We must stop equating brokenness with weakness. Some of the most powerful people we will ever meet are those who have fallen and risen again. People who have lost everything, yet still show up. People who have been hurt deeply, yet still choose to heal others. That kind of strength cannot be taught in a classroom or earned through privilege. It is lived, it is fought for, it is born in struggle and refined in silence. That girl, unknown to the world until that moment, became a symbol of something we need more of: quiet power. Not the kind that boasts or demands, but the kind that sees a life in danger and says, not today. The kind that doesn't wait to be asked, doesn't ask for recognition, and doesn't need applause. She did what she did because she knew it was right. Because life had taught her the value of a second chance, and perhaps that's the most remarkable part. She didn't see herself as a hero. She didn't think she had done something incredible. To her, it was simple. Someone needed help, and she helped. That humility, that instinct, that strength, it was all forged through a life most of us couldn't survive for a week. Let this remind us, do not look away from the broken. Do not assume weakness in those who struggle. Because within the heart of the struggling girl on the sidewalk may beat the strongest heart you'll ever meet. Fate is a strange and silent architect. It builds bridges we cannot see and places people in our path we never expect. That morning, when she pulled a man from the freezing waters of the lake, she had no idea who he was. To her, he was just a life that needed saving. Not a stranger, not a burden, not even a question. He was a soul in danger, and that was enough. She didn't stop to ask his name. She didn't look at what he wore or try to guess what kind of life he lived. All she saw was a human being slipping under the surface, and she chose to reach for him. What she couldn't have known, what no one could have imagined, was that this man held something that would change her life forever. He wasn't just someone in need, he was someone in power, a person who had spent years at the top of a world she had only seen from the outside. He was successful, admired, and wealthy, but that day none of those things mattered. He wasn't a title, he wasn't a businessman, he was simply broken, not because he fell in the lake, but because he had jumped. He had given up, and it was her voice, her reaching hands, her fierce insistence that he live, that pulled him back not just physically, but emotionally. In saving him, she unknowingly disrupted the narrative he had written for himself. A narrative of hopelessness, of being alone, of believing that no one would miss him if he disappeared, but someone had missed him. Someone who had nothing gave him everything in that moment, her courage, her care, her belief that his life still had meaning. And that simple act sparked a chain of events that neither of them could have seen coming. When the truth came out about who he was, a philanthropist and CEO battling silent depression, it changed the public's view of both of them. But what mattered most wasn't his wealth. It was his gratitude, because he didn't just say thank you. He took action. He used his voice to tell her story. He used his influence to shine light where darkness had lived too long. And through that, he gave her a new beginning. But here's what matters more. She never asked for it. She didn't help him expecting a reward. She didn't save him to change her life. She saved him because she knew what it meant to feel like you don't matter. She knew what it meant to scream into silence, and in that moment her own scars became her greatest source of wisdom. Fate has a way of weaving lives together when we least expect it. The man she saved had the resources to lift her out of homelessness, to get her the help and education she had long been denied. But that's not what makes the story powerful. What makes it powerful is that it all began with a selfless act. One moment of human connection between two people on opposite ends of society, one drowning in water, the other drowning in poverty, and somehow they saved each other. Too often, we're taught to see the world in hierarchies. Rich and poor, strong and weak, givers and takers, but life is rarely that simple. Sometimes the one who looks like they have it all is falling apart, and sometimes the one the world has cast aside holds the strength to lift someone up. In this case, the girl the world ignored became the reason a powerful man chose to keep living. There's a lesson in that for all of us. We never know who we're standing next to. We never know what pain someone is carrying, or what impact one act of kindness can have. We may think we're just helping someone in the moment, but that moment may echo for the rest of their life. And sometimes, when we reach out to save someone else, we end up rescuing ourselves too. That girl may have saved him from death, but he gave her something just as life-changing, the chance to be seen, the chance to dream again, the chance to live not just to survive, but to grow, to inspire, and to give back. So when we talk about fate, we must remember it often arrives quietly, in unlikely forms. It speaks not with thunder, but with whispers, a glance, a voice, a hand stretched through cold water, and in those small, powerful moments, the course of a life can shift. All because one person said yes to helping another, without knowing they were helping themselves too. The ripples from a single act of courage often travel further than we realize. When the homeless girl pulled the man from the freezing lake, it wasn't just a rescue. It was the ignition of a fire that spread through communities, hearts, and minds. At first, she was just a name in a local paper. A passing story. A moment of unexpected bravery. But something about it resonated deeply. It challenged the way people thought. It forced society to pause, to reconsider, to reflect on how easily we overlook the potential of those we deem invisible. And that reflection grew into something bigger, a wave of public awareness that began to shift perception. People began to ask questions, not just about her, but about all those like her. Who are these young souls living on the streets? What do we really know about their struggles, their dreams, their potential? News anchors told her story. Social workers repeated it in meetings. Teachers shared it in classrooms. Her name, once unknown, became a symbol of what happens when you dare to care even when the world hasn't cared for you. Suddenly, the narrative surrounding homelessness began to change. No longer just a problem. It became a conversation about humanity, equity, resilience. The image of her soaked and shivering but alive with purpose gripped people's hearts. She had saved a life, and now her story was saving others, not through action but through inspiration. Donations to shelters rose. Communities organized outreach efforts. Politicians, pressured by public response, visited local shelters, promising reforms. All because one girl did something extraordinary with no expectation of praise. What makes her story so powerful is that it exposed something uncomfortable, that heroism is not always found in polished places. It lives among the discarded, the quiet, the hurting. We've been conditioned to believe that people need to be lifted up before they can offer anything back. But she proved that contribution is not tied to comfort, that even in the most broken places, greatness can rise, and because of that, people started to look differently at those they once ignored. But the impact didn't stop with the public. Her story deeply moved the very institutions that had once failed her. A local shelter that had previously turned her away due to capacity began reviewing its policies. A school principal, hearing about her courage, partnered with volunteers to offer basic education and mentorship to homeless youth. Social workers found their caseloads becoming more human, more urgent, because her story gave a face to a system that too often sees only numbers. And in every corner, from small towns to major cities, her bravery became a spark. Even young people began to speak her name. Students who had once laughed at or feared the homeless began starting kindness clubs. organizing drives for hygiene kits, blankets, and socks. She became a kind of modern myth, not the distant kind from books, but a real, raw reminder that anyone can be powerful, no matter where they come from, that even the ones who have been forgotten can help the world remember what truly matters. And yet through it all, she remained grounded, humble, unchanged by the attention, but transformed by the fact that people finally listened. She used her platform not to ask for sympathy, but to speak for others still living her old life. Her message was clear: don't look at me like I'm different. There are thousands like me. I just happen to be seen. That humility, that fire, that honesty, it became a movement toward empathy, a movement toward justice, a movement toward recognizing that help, when given with heart, is not a transaction. It's a transformation. And the girl who had once only been noticed when asking for coins was now the reason institutions were giving out chances. So the ripple of her action continues, touching people she'll never meet, changing policies she'll never read, opening doors for others who are still locked in silence. That's what true impact looks like, not loud or fast, but steady. A drop in the water that turns into a tide, a moment that turns into a message, and a life that, once invisible, becomes a beacon. Even after the applause faded, the headlines disappeared, and the cameras moved on to the next story, the homeless girl's life did not return to what it was. But neither did it become a perfect fairy tale. That's the part people often forget. Real transformation doesn't happen in one grand gesture. It happens in small, slow steps, sometimes painful, often invisible to the world. Yes, her act of bravery opened a door, but what lay beyond that door wasn't luxury or ease. It was the beginning of a long and difficult climb, a journey inward, a reckoning with trauma, a path not just toward healing, but toward rediscovering herself. The man she saved and the recognition she received afterward gave her an opportunity, a place to stay, a second chance at education, people willing to help, but opportunity is only the seed. She still had to grow. And growth after pain is messy. At times, she didn't know how to trust. She had spent so long expecting disappointment that kindness felt strange, even threatening. When people praised her, she flinched. When people offered help, she questioned their motives. She wasn't being ungrateful. She was being human. A human who had spent years navigating a world where trust could be dangerous and hope felt like a trap. But day by day, she chose to believe, not blindly, not easily, but bravely. She showed up to therapy sessions even when it hurt. She sat in classrooms, learning to read and write again. She tried, failed, and tried again. She cried over memories of nights spent hungry and afraid. She revisited the pain of being abandoned, judged, and forgotten. But she did the work, not because someone was watching, not because it would earn her more praise, but because she had finally been given a chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. And then something even more beautiful happened. As she began to rebuild her own life, she turned outward. She started visiting shelters, not as a resident, but as a mentor. She began to speak, not just to media, but to young girls still living in the fear she once knew. She didn't come with solutions or miracles. She came with honesty. She said, "I know what it's like. I've been where you are, and I'm still climbing, but here's what helped me." Her story became more than a headline. It became a guide. She also learned to forgive those who passed her by, those who didn't help, even those who hurt her. Not because they deserved it, but because carrying anger was too heavy. Forgiveness became part of her healing. It didn't erase the past, but it gave her the strength to face the future with lighter shoulders. And slowly, something incredible happened. The girl who once had no voice became a speaker. The girl who had no bed became a builder. She helped design programs for runaway teens, advised on policy changes in the foster system, and wrote letters to officials advocating for shelter reform. The same streets that had once swallowed her now listened when she spoke. But perhaps the most powerful transformation happened inside her. She no longer saw herself as a victim. She saw herself as a survivor, a leader, a light, not because she was perfect, but because she kept showing up even when it was hard. She learned that healing is not about forgetting, it's about choosing love in a world that once gave you none. It's about being soft in a world that tried to make you hard. It's about finding your voice and using it not to scream, but to lift others higher. And so, her journey became a full circle, not because everything was fixed, but because she had found meaning in the very pain that once silenced her. She became a living reminder that even the most broken beginnings can lead to powerful futures. That dignity is not something you earn, it's something you reclaim, and that true change is not about escaping your story, but embracing it so fully that it becomes a path for others to walk through. The world may have first seen her as a homeless girl who saved a man, but those who know her now understand the deeper truth. She is a woman who saved herself, and in doing so, is helping others find the strength to do the same.